"You're not my daughter-in-law since you disobeyed me," my mother-in-law snapped, her lips tightening like she was biting into something sour. The words didn't echo, they landed heavy, like a glass shattering on marble. The dining room went silent. Forks froze midair. Even the clock on the wall seemed embarrassed to keep ticking. I smiled, just a small, deliberate curve of my lips. Not because I found it funny, not because I agreed, but because if I let my real expression show the sting in my chest, the heat rising up my neck, it would give her exactly what she wanted. So, I smiled, and under the table, my hand tightened around my glass until my knuckles turned white. It was strange how quickly the body reacts to humiliation. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs, fast and uneven. My stomach twisted as though I'd swallowed ice water. My legs itched with the urge to stand up, to walk out, to do something. But I didn't. I sat still, frozen smile plastered on, as if someone had hit pause on me, while the whole family waited for the next scene. My mother-in-law leaned back in her chair, satisfied, like a cat that had just batted a mouse into the corner. Her eyes scanned the table, daring anyone else to challenge her. No one did. My husband, Daniel, lowered his gaze to his plate, pretending to chase a piece of asparagus with his fork. My sister-in-law smirked faintly, sipping her wine, enjoying the spectacle. And me? I just smiled. But inside I was replaying the sentence again and again, like a bad commercial that won't stop looping. "You're not my daughter-in-law since you disobeyed me." It wasn't just the words, it was the finality in them. The way she stripped me of a role, of a title, as though she had the power to erase the years of marriage, the vows I had exchanged with her son, the child I had carried into this family. With one sentence, she tried to make me a ghost at my own table. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would slice through the smugness in her eyes, but instead I let the smile do the work. A smile can be sharper than a knife if you let it linger long enough. The room was warm, too warm, filled with the smell of roasted turkey and the faint perfume she always wore, heavy and sweet, like wilted roses. The chandelier above flickered once, and for a second the shadows on the wall looked like bars of a cage. I wondered if anyone else noticed the absurdity that she had just disowned me, mid-dinner, like she was commenting on the weather. But no one moved. The silence thickened. I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes, some pitying, some curious, some secretly relieved it wasn't them in the hot seat. I leaned back, tilted my head just slightly, and kept smiling. Because here's the thing. I had come prepared. I didn't know exactly what she would say tonight, but I knew it would be something. There had been signs. The way her voice tightened on the phone earlier that week, the seating arrangement, with me at the far end of the table, almost like an afterthought. The way she had forgotten to mention my name in the family prayer before the meal. Each little clue stacked up, until I could feel the storm gathering. So yes, when she finally dropped the hammer, I wasn't surprised. I was ready. I shifted slightly in my chair, letting the tension roll off me in slow waves. My hand slipped into my bag, fingertips brushing against the envelope I had brought along. A plain white envelope, unremarkable, ordinary, but its contents? Enough to tilt the balance of power in this room forever. I smiled again, wider this time, the kind of smile that unsettles people because they can't tell if you're amused or plotting something. My mother-in-law's eyes narrowed. She didn't like not knowing. Control was her favorite flavor, and my smile tasted like defiance. Underneath the table, my foot tapped once, a steady beat against the hardwood floor. Not from nerves well, maybe a little, but mostly to keep time, like a drummer counting down before the music shifts. 1, 2, 3, and then I thought, should I do it now? Or let her twist a little longer? Daniel still wouldn't look at me. His fork scraped against the plate, a grating sound in the silence. He knew better than to intervene. He had been raised in this house. He knew how his mother operated. Like a judge in her own private court, verdicts delivered without appeal. But tonight, I wasn't going to be silent witness. The room held its breath. My smile didn't falter. My mother-in-law adjusted her necklace, waiting for me to crack, to protest, to cry, to beg for acceptance. That's how it always went before. She struck. I absorbed. She pushed. I bent. Not tonight, because tonight I had something she didn't expect. Something that would wipe that smug look off her face and make every single person at this table remember this evening for the rest of their lives. I let the pause stretch, savoring it. And then, slowly, deliberately, I set my glass down. The sound of it meeting the table was louder than it should have been, like a gavel striking. My hand slipped back into my bag. The envelope slid into my palm, thin but heavy with promise. I placed it gently on the table in front of her. No words. Just the soft scrape of paper against wood. Her eyes flicked down, then back up, suspicious. She didn't move. No one moved. The air was so tense it felt like static, buzzing just under my skin. I leaned forward, still smiling, and whispered just loud enough for her and everyone else to hear. "You might want to open that." Her painted nails hovered over the edge of the envelope, hesitation betraying her usual iron grip on the room. For the first time all evening, she looked uncertain. And me? I sat back, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and smiled. Because the thing about storms is they look powerful until someone opens a window and lets the wind rush out. And I was holding the window. What was inside that envelope? Oh, that's the part I'll let you wonder. For now, all you need to know is this. The night she tried to erase me, I gave her something she could never forget. The thing is, I knew something was off long before my mother-in-law ever opened her mouth. You can feel it sometimes, like a draft slipping under a closed door, or the way a song changes key just slightly before the big drop. My gut told me this dinner wasn't going to be just another family meal. And if I'm honest, my gut is rarely wrong. It started with the invitation, or rather, the lack of one. Daniel had told me about the dinner 2 days before, casually, like he was mentioning a grocery list. Mom said we're having everyone over on Friday night, 7 o'clock. No call from her. No text. Not even a group message. Just relayed through her son, like I was a neighbor, being notified about a block party. I remember raising an eyebrow. "Everyone?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, Mom said all the family will be there." The word family clanged in my chest like a dull bell. In her world, family was a flexible concept, and I was usually the one on the chopping block when she decided to trim the definition. Still, I got ready. Picked a dress that was understated but not plain. Spent an hour cooking my signature green bean casserole, the one that usually disappeared first at any potluck. I even made a small dessert just in case. I told myself maybe this was an olive branch, a chance for things to finally thaw between us. Hope is stubborn like that, but when we walked into her house, I felt it immediately. The dining room was already buzzing. Voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. But as soon as Daniel and I stepped through the archway, the temperature shifted. Not literally, it was still warm from the oven, filled with the buttery smell of roasted turkey and baked rolls, but emotionally, it was colder than ice water down the back of my neck. Everyone was there. My sister-in-law, perched on the couch in a silk blouse, scrolling through her phone. Her husband, half listening, nodding like he was trying to keep time to a rhythm only he could hear. My father-in-law, sitting stiff in his chair at the head of the table, nursing a glass of red wine like it was a lifeline. And then, of course, my mother-in-law, commanding the room from her spot near the center, pearls strung tight around her neck, lipstick drawn sharp like armor. She greeted me with the kind of smile you give a cashier at the grocery store. Polite, thin, disposable. "Glad you could make it," she said, not looking at me but at Daniel, as though I had come as his +1. That was the first clue. The second was the table. My seat, usually beside Daniel, had been nudged to the far end, practically in another zip code. A small shift, subtle enough for anyone else to overlook, but deliberate. I recognized her handwriting in that arrangement. She liked her symbols. I placed my casserole on the counter, waiting for some acknowledgement. A thank you, a nod, even a polite comment. Nothing. She swept right past it, gesturing instead at the dishes she had prepared herself. I smiled, tight-lipped, telling myself not to make a scene, but every detail gnawed at me, the way my sister-in-law smirked when she saw where I had been seated. The way Daniel didn't notice or pretended not to. The way my mother-in-law lifted her glass during the family prayer and listed names everyone's name except mine. That one stung more than I wanted to admit, but I held it in. Saturday at the far end of the table, smoothed the napkin on my lap, and played the role. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed the way my hand trembled slightly when I reached for my water, the way my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. The conversation buzzed along the table like static on a radio. Talk about work, vacations, neighborhood gossip. I chimed in once, mentioning Daniel's recent promotion, but my words were swallowed by a louder story about my sister-in-law's new car. I shut my mouth after that, sipping water, letting the chatter wash over me. Still, beneath the surface, I was bracing. Because here's the truth. Nights like this have a pattern. First, the small slights, then the bigger ones, and eventually the strike. I had been through this enough to know the rhythm. The waiting game was almost worse than the blow itself. Sitting there, nodding along, pretending everything was fine, when in reality I was counting the seconds until the inevitable. I tried to distract myself with details. The way the chandelier light hit the polished wood of the table, casting small halos on the silverware. The faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen, cycling through someone's forgotten coffee mug. The scent of perfume clinging too thick in the air, like wilted roses pressed against my nose. I wanted to believe it was just me being paranoid. That maybe, just maybe, she'd let the evening pass without a jab, that the storm I felt building was only in my head. But then she caught my eye from across the table. Just a flicker, a glance sharp enough to slice through the room. It wasn't long, just a second, but it was enough. I knew then, it was coming. And when she finally leaned forward, lips tightening, voice sharp enough to pierce the silence, I wasn't surprised. You're not my daughter-in-law since you disobeyed me. The room froze. My heart clenched, and I smiled. Because everything leading up to that moment, the invitation, the seat, the missing name, the smirk, the silence, it had all been pointing here. And I was ready. This wasn't the first time she had tried to cut me out of the picture. Far from it. Her words that night were just the latest in a long string of carefully crafted blows, each one designed to remind me that in her eyes, I was temporary, replaceable, never quite enough. I remember the first time I felt it. It was right after Daniel and I got engaged. We were at her house for dinner, and she had prepared this elaborate spread roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh bread straight from the oven. It should have been warm and welcoming, but the moment we sat down, she looked across the table at me and said, I thought Daniel would wait a little longer before settling, but I guess this is what he wants. The smile on her face didn't match the words. It was polite, even sweet on the surface, but the undertone was razor sharp. My stomach twisted, but I swallowed it down. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea not to make it worse. So I stayed quiet. That was my first lesson. Silence was easier, but silence has a way of feeding people like her. Months later, when I moved into the house Daniel and I bought together, she arrived uninvited with boxes of her old china, insisting we rearrange the cabinets to make room for tradition. She watched as I carefully removed the dishes I had picked out, stacking them aside, my own taste slowly erased shelf by shelf. Daniel told me not to fight it. It's just easier this way, he whispered. Another lesson. Easier for him didn't mean easier for me. Then came the wedding. That was supposed to be my day, ours. I had dreamed about it, planned every detail. But at the rehearsal dinner, she stood up with a glass of champagne and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, tomorrow will be perfect, because my son is marrying the woman he loves, though I always imagined someone different. Laughter rippled across the room, awkward and thin, like a cough you can't quite clear. My cheeks burned, but I smiled, hiding behind my glass. Daniel froze beside me, stuck between his mother's shadow and my silent plea for support. He said nothing. Another lesson. If I wanted dignity, I would have to carry it myself. The pattern only grew sharper after our son Ethan was born. Motherhood should have been the one role no one could question, but she found ways. At Ethan's first birthday, I had ordered a cake with his name and mine piped in blue frosting, Happy Birthday, Ethan, Love Mom. When we brought it out, I watched her slice carefully around my name, serving everyone pieces that conveniently left me off. Nobody said a word. I stared at the empty plate in front of me and told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. Every slight added weight to the invisible backpack I carried into that house. Every jab, every omission, every smirk, they built a history. And history is hard to ignore when it keeps repeating itself. Even small moments carried their own sting. The way she introduced me at neighborhood gatherings as Daniel's wife, but never by my actual name. The way she corrected me when I tried a recipe, reminding everyone at the table that her version was better. The way she'd brush past me in photos, positioning herself beside Daniel, while I stood slightly off to the side, cropped out before the camera even clicked. There was always a plausible excuse. Always a way to dismiss it if I dared to bring it up. You're too sensitive. She didn't mean it that way. It's just her personality. Daniel said those things often, trying to smooth the jagged edges. But the cuts still bled, whether or not he acknowledged them. And each time I stayed quiet, my silence turned into permission. So when she looked me dead in the eye at that dinner table and said, "You're not my daughter-in-law since you disobeyed me," it wasn't new. It wasn't surprising. It was the same performance, louder this time, stripped of its polite mask. But here's the difference. She thought I would react the same way I always had. Smile politely. Stay quiet. Absorb the blow. What she didn't realize was that I had been keeping count. Every insult, every erasure, every humiliation, I remembered them all. They stacked up like bricks, building a wall inside me. And that night, I decided the wall was high enough. I wasn't going to let her write me out of my own life story anymore. That's why the envelope was in my bag. That's why I came to dinner ready. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I was done being blindsided. Done letting her dictate my worth. The truth is, storms don't come out of nowhere. They brew, slowly, over time, until the sky can't hold them anymore. And when they finally break, it's not the rain that shocks you, it's the thunder that was rumbling all along, finally roaring loud enough for everyone to hear. That night at the table, when she tried to erase me with one sentence, all I could think was, this isn't the beginning. This is the end of something that's been building for years. And I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The room had never been so quiet. The words still hung there, suspended in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle. You're not my daughter-in-law since you disobeyed me. It was incredible how a sentence could drain a room of oxygen. My ears rang, faint and hollow, like I'd been plunged underwater. The light above us seemed harsher, too bright against the polished wood of the dining table. Even the clinking forks, the idle chatter, the shallow laughter, all of it had vanished in a snap. I sat frozen for a beat, staring at her across the table. Her face was sharp, carved in satisfaction, lips pressed into a thin, victorious line. She had said it out loud, in front of everyone, as if delivering a final judgment in a courtroom she alone presided over. My heart pounded, but my expression didn't change. I smiled. Not wide, not giddy, but steady. And that unsettled her more than anything I could have said. Daniel shifted beside me, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on his plate as though asparagus tips and mashed potatoes were suddenly the most important things in the world. His silence wasn't new, but tonight it was deafening. From the corner of my vision, I saw my sister-in-law pause mid-sip of her wine, a smirk tugging at her mouth. She loved a spectacle, especially one where I was the unwilling star. Across from her, my father-in-law rubbed the stem of his glass, swirling the wine without drinking, the deep red catching the chandelier light like blood in water. And then there was Ethan, perched on a booster seat between me and Daniel, clutching his little plastic fork. His eyes flicked between the adults, wide and confused. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the tension. Children always do. The heat crawled up my neck, but I forced myself to stay still. My pulse drummed in my throat, my palms damp against the napkin in my lap. Every instinct screamed at me to react, to defend myself, to shout, to cry, but I didn't. Because I knew something she didn't. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy, like a taut wire ready to snap. The chandelier above hummed faintly, and the scent of roasted turkey, once warm and inviting now, felt suffocating, cloying. I reached for my glass of water, lifted it slowly, and took a measured sip. The cool liquid slid down my throat, anchoring me. I set the glass down carefully, the soft thud against the table far louder than it should have been. And then I leaned back, meeting her eyes across the table, letting my smile linger just long enough to unsettle her. Her brow twitched. She expected me to fold, to plead, to justify. That was her pattern. Strike, wait for the recoil, bask in her control. But tonight, I wasn't giving her that. My hand slipped into my bag beside my chair, fingers brushed against smooth paper. The envelope, plain white, unremarkable, but weighted with more power than she could imagine. I slid it out slowly, savoring the moment. My nails tapped once against its surface, soft but deliberate. Heads turned. My sister-in-law lowered her glass, suddenly alert. My father-in-law's swirling stopped, his hand frozen mid-circle. Even Daniel risked a glance, eyes darting from the envelope to my face, panic flickering across his features. I placed it on the table in front of me. Not a slam, not a toss. Just a simple placement, the sound of paper against polished wood echoing louder than it had any right to. Her eyes followed the movement, narrowed. She tilted her head, lips pursed, pretending disinterest. But the tension in her jaw betrayed her. "What's that?" she asked, voice sharp but strained. I folded my hands in my lap, leaned slightly forward, and kept my tone calm, almost casual. "Something you'll want to see." The silence thickened. My sister-in-law's smirk faltered. My father-in-law set his glass down carefully, as though afraid to make noise. Daniel's hand twitched against the tablecloth, but he stayed silent. Ethan tapped his fork against his plate, the only sound in the room. She reached forward slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the envelope. Hesitation, uncertainty, two emotions I had rarely seen on her face. "You brought something?" she asked, her voice a half-tone lower now, defensive, curious. "Yes," I said, my smile never fading. "For this exact moment." The words landed heavy, deliberate. Her eyes flicked around the table, gauging her audience, measuring the shift she could feel but not control. I leaned back again, resting against the chair, every inch of me calm, though my heartbeat was a steady drum in my chest. I wanted her to open it right then and there, in front of everyone. I wanted her mask to slip, the way mine had been forced to so many times before. But I didn't push. Instead, I let the envelope sit there between us, like a live wire humming with electricity, daring her to touch it, to unleash what was inside. She tried to hold my gaze, to intimidate me with that cold stare she had perfected over the years. But for once, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. Because the truth was simple, she had already lost control. And she knew it. Her fingers hovered over the envelope like it was a snake she wasn't sure she wanted to touch. The whole table seemed to tilt toward that small piece of paper, the air stretching tight, the silence louder than any argument we'd ever had. She looked at me, waiting for a tell, some crack in my expression that would give her an edge. But all she got was the same smile, calm, controlled, measured. "Go ahead," I said softly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The stillness gave it weight. Daniel finally lifted his eyes, darting from me to the envelope, his throat working as he swallowed hard. His silence burned hotter than any words he might have said. It was his mother's house, his mother's table, and yet he looked as if he were the guest now, unsure of the rules. My sister-in-law leaned forward, curiosity lighting her face, her smirk long gone. For once, she wanted answers more than she wanted my humiliation. My father-in-law shifted in his chair, letting out a cough that sounded more like a warning than a reflex. And then there was Ethan, still tapping his plastic fork against the plate in a small rhythm, oblivious to the storm swirling above him. His innocence cut through the tension like a knife, and I steadied myself. This wasn't just about me anymore. My mother-in-law finally touched the envelope. Her manicured nails slid along the edge, slow, deliberate. She didn't open it, of course not. Control was her game, and she wanted to dictate the timing. She leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. "What exactly is this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice cool, but there was a quiver beneath it. I tilted my head, resting my chin lightly on my hand. "Let's just call it perspective," I said. That single word rippled down the table. My sister-in-law blinked, confused. My father-in-law set his glass down too quickly, the wine inside sloshing against the rim. Daniel flinched, as though he knew what was coming but couldn't stop it. I let the pause stretch, then added, "You've always been very clear about who belongs at this table, about who counts as family. That envelope holds something that might remind you of what you stand to lose when you draw those lines too sharply." Her lips pressed into a thin line, the pearls around her neck rising and falling with her quickened breath. "You're playing games," she said finally, though her voice lacked the usual steel. "No," I said, still smiling. "You are. I'm just holding up a mirror." The silence after that was suffocating. I could feel the weight of every gaze pressing against me, waiting for me to say more, to explain, to reveal. But I didn't. I let the envelope sit there like a loaded gun no one dared to fire. Daniel's hand brushed against mine under the table, a silent question. Was I serious? Did I mean to go through with this? I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes locked on hers. She tapped the envelope with one finger, a nervous habit disguised as impatience. "If you think you can intimidate me," I cut her off gently, not with volume, but with clarity. "It's not intimidation, it's truth. Whether you open it now or later doesn't matter. What matters is that you know it's there, that you know the game has changed." Her face tightened. She hated being cornered, hated being reminded she wasn't untouchable. My father-in-law cleared his throat again, trying to diffuse the tension. "Maybe we should—" "No," she snapped, her hand flattening against the table. Her eyes burned into mine. If she has something to say, let her say it. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice so it forced everyone to lean in to catch the words. "I already did, with that envelope." The chandelier light caught on the glossy paper, making it glow faintly, as though it carried more weight than its size suggested. And in a way, it did. It carried years of silence. Years of swallowed words. Years of humiliation, wrapped in one simple, undeniable truth she could no longer ignore. She pushed her chair back slightly, as though she might stand, but then stopped. Her hand hovered over the envelope again, trembling just enough to betray her. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "Mom, maybe this isn't—" "Quiet," she snapped, not even glancing at him. Her entire focus was on me now, and I could feel the heat of her stare, the frustration, the fear. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I had nothing left to lose. The table sat suspended between breaths, everyone waiting to see what she would do. And I just smiled, the kind of smile that says more than any speech could. Because whether she opened the envelope tonight or tomorrow didn't matter. The shift had already happened. The balance had tipped. She knew it, I knew it. Everyone at that table knew it. For the first time, she wasn't the only one writing the script. Her hand hovered over the envelope so long that the air itself seemed to stall. The chandelier hummed faintly above. Forks remained frozen in midair, and even Ethan had stopped tapping his plastic fork, sensing the gravity of a silence too heavy for his young mind to process. But she didn't open it. Not that night. She just stared at it, her lips pressed tight, her fingers twitching like she was deciding whether to pull the trigger on a weapon that might fire back at her. I leaned back, my posture relaxed, but inside my heart was racing. I didn't need her to open it right then. The real power wasn't in the contents, it was in the anticipation, the uncertainty, the way that thin envelope unsettled a woman who had built her entire identity on control. "Are you going to look?" my sister-in-law finally whispered, her voice cracking through the stillness. My mother-in-law shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Not here," she said firmly, pulling her hand back as if the envelope burned. I smiled again, that same calm, deliberate curve of the lips that had carried me through the entire evening. "That's fine," I murmured. "Take your time, but remember it doesn't disappear just because you ignore it." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she picked up her wine glass, drained it in one long swallow, and set it down with a little too much force. The sound echoed down the table. The conversation never truly resumed after that. My father-in-law tried, bless him, tossing out a question about the weather forecast, but the words fell flat, dissolving into the thick tension. My sister-in-law fiddled with her phone, pretending to scroll while stealing glances at the envelope. Daniel stayed locked in his silence, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid. And Ethan leaned against me, small and warm, oblivious but comforted by my steady hand, smoothing his hair. When the meal finally wound down, dishes scraped and chairs shifted, I stood slowly, gathering my things. My casserole dish sat untouched on the counter, forgotten in the drama. I lifted it anyway, holding it against my chest like a shield. My mother-in-law didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. The envelope on the table was farewell enough. As we stepped out into the cold night air, Daniel finally spoke. What was in it? His voice was low, uncertain, as though he was afraid of the answer. I looked at him, at the man I had built a life with, the father of my son, the boy still tethered by invisible strings to the woman inside that house. My smile softened, not sharp this time, but weary. Something she can't ignore, I said simply. He didn't ask again. He just nodded, slipping his hand into mine as we walked to the car. For once, I let him hold the silence, because I had no intention of filling it. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed and watched his chest rise and fall in peaceful rhythm, I realized something important. I had always believed my mother-in-law's power over me came from her words, her influence, her role. But in reality, it had come from my silence. Every time I stayed quiet, every time I smiled to cover the sting, every time I let her rewrite my place in that family, I had handed her the pen. Not anymore. The envelope was more than paper and ink. It was a declaration that I was done playing the role she had written for me, done standing at the far end of the table, cropped out of the picture before the flash, done being erased. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me for turning the mirror on her. I don't know if she'll ever admit what that envelope made her see. But I do know this. That night, something shifted. And whether she realizes it or not, she's no longer the only one holding the script. Maybe you've been there too, sitting at a table where you were supposed to belong, only to feel invisible. Maybe you've smiled through words that cut deeper than anyone else could see. And maybe you've stayed silent, thinking it was easier, when really it was just permission. If there's one lesson I carried from that dinner, it's this. Sometimes strength doesn't look like shouting back. Sometimes it looks like staying calm, smiling when they expect you to break, and placing your truth right in front of them where they can't look away. So no, I don't know if my mother-in-law will ever open that envelope. I don't know what she'll do when she does. But I do know she'll never forget the moment it landed on her table, heavier than any insult she had ever thrown my way, and neither will I. If you've ever sat through a moment like that, if you've ever felt erased, remember you don't have to hand over the pen. You can write your own lines. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of quiet strength and unexpected turns, make sure you hit subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.